North African nation, the oil-rich country, the strategic location on the southern flank of Europe, and to top it all off, the dictatorship-free state since October 2011. This seems the perfect story of a successful nation. But wait. Then there's politics. And with the politics and power hunger of the post-Gaddafi era comes foreign intervention, and this is where Libya takes a U-turn, as it kept an open door to foreign influence and interference because in one way or another, countries like the United States, United Kingdom, and France helped make the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi possible. But that open door wasn't firmly closed. It was kept ajar by the successive governments in Libya, and guess who kicked it open? Russia. As strange bedfellows as they are, the Europeans, US, and Russia all maintained interest and good relations with Libya, even when the country split into East and West camps, with the East under Khalifa Haftar going rogue many times and trying to assert control of the country by force.
And we also noticed that the Americans have trouble finding the right policy to make their coercion or their decision to kind of become painful to Russia in Libya. It's not easy, because if you become painful to Russia, you also become painful to Haftar. And we sense that the Americans have a lot of difficulty touching the Haftar family.
Haftar, a dual Libyan and US citizen who lived next to the CIA headquarters for over 20 years before the death of Gaddafi, wanted more than the US could offer, and that was something the Kremlin was willing to give.
I think the United States, since it was betrayed by Haftar in 2015, and I think the United States has not been able to decide on what to do with Haftar, considering their effort in growing him up since he spent more than 20 years near CIA headquarters. So it's not a difficult cost for US to pay, because it's not easy to replace Haftar in the eyes of United States bureaucracy and some European countries. So I think Russia is just taking advantage of Haftar's own ambitions, because he has his own political agenda.
So Haftar's first public encounter with the Russians was when he was given a tour of a Russian aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean.
Khalifa Haftar was received in a very official, overt, provocative manner on the aircraft carrier in eastern Libya on the day Donald Trump was inaugurated. And soon after that, we saw a clandestine presence. So what I'm saying is that we're not seeing a Russia changing the nature of its presence. Its presence is inherently clandestine, but politically we have the state, the Russian state, that is above, that calls the shots, and the overall framework is actually decided by the state. So all of it is now becoming very visible, very brazen.
He then got closer to the Kremlin with a few visits to Moscow, and when the time was right, and when he got a Trump approval to quickly attack Tripoli and seize power by force in April 2019, he brought in Russia's Wagner Group mercenaries. However, the attack failed. Haftar and his forces and the Russian soldiers of fortune returned eastward, and they have been positioned in there and in some central and southern parts of Libya since then. And yet, this hasn't triggered a very tough position from the United States.
I think there's a lot of arguments, and if you take each argument, you will notice that it doesn't work. For example, the fact that Haftar is a US citizen makes him more attractive to Russia, not less attractive, because Russia loves the fact that he trusts them more, trusts the Russians more than the Americans. So the fact that he's an American citizen is not an asset to Washington, is actually an asset to Moscow. And then the other argument is to go and politely ask him to distance himself from a footprint. I'm really referring to the Wagner footprint here, that has been growing organically in an intertwined fashion with all the things that the Libyan National Army has done since the defeat on the outskirts of Tripoli. Like the growth in the south has been done hand in hand with Wagner, the growth in Sirte, the security of Benghazi being bolstered, the air defense systems. All of this is organically dependent on the clandestine presence of Wagner. So it just doesn't make any sense to go and ask someone to weaken himself, because that's what it would mean. If you ask politely and courteously, the Haftar family, for example, Khalid Haftar, the 106, was trained in great part by the Russians. And Khalid loves the Russians for that reason, amongst other reasons. So to go and ask them politely to step away from the very source of protection that they have, that they know they cannot replace with anybody else, it makes no sense. Like, you either decide to become very unpleasant and use coercion, or you don't do anything.
To that end, Haftar received the Deputy Defense Minister Yevgerov in Benghazi twice, in last August and September. And then Haftar himself visited Moscow in late September and met for the first time with President Putin. And contrary to the US pressure on him to part ways with Wagner, he somehow discussed their expansion and an effort to build a Russian base with a defense system in the eastern region.
Yeah, I think Tobruk is difficult, but Sirte is feasible because it's far away enough from the Egyptians. And tomorrow we might hear that there's a new training program from the Navy in Russia for the benefit of Haftar's own Navy. And it will declare that it's like some security sector reform, some kind of cooperation program. And then what will the Americans do? It's the same. It's like the drone that was shot down by the Russians. It's an American drone, probably a $2 or $2.5 million drone, shot over Benghazi in August 2022. You would think, in theory, that the Americans would respond. Have they responded? They haven't done it. They haven't said anything, because to respond consists in weakening and hurting the only security architecture in all of eastern Libya, and nobody wants that.
The idea of Wagner expansion came after the death of their boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and the new overt policy of Russia claiming Wagner Group's affiliation after years of clandestine support. The US Africa Command's chief Michael Langley visited both Tripoli and Benghazi in an American attempt to get Haftar to backtrack on the honeymoon he's having with the Russians. But the Libyan American took no heed of the US polite request and went to Putin anyway, in an endeavor to strengthen his position ahead of any possibility of elections being held in Libya. Elections that seem a long shot to take, despite the promises of the Central Government of National Unity in Tripoli under Abdul Hamid Baiba, who still maintains relations with Moscow, Washington, and even the Haftar family. So with the continued US-Russia influence in Libya, and their centered focus on bolstering their allies' military might rather than pushing them toward elections, will Libya ever go back on the track of democracy that has been the epicenter of February Revolution, which toppled a dictator for a better life?